Receipt of the county facilities tax.
I wanted to put this on the agenda tonight for a couple of reasons. One reason is, and I handed out the sheet with the amounts on there right before the meeting, is that we've really never officially recognized these funds. And I'm not sure all of you are familiar with.
Where are they now? Are they in the unreserved fund balance, or are they in a separate fund? Where are they?
We have them under the mattress right now.
I've seen them anywhere, and I've looked at the budget for the last few years.
I'm only partially being facetious. I mean, this began in, if I remember right, the summer of '07, and this new law that came into effect created this, where the situation where the county had to pay us 30% of the facilities tax that they received if construction was done within the city of Franklin. They got a $1 facilities tax. They had to give 30 cents back to the city. And I think the rationale in the state law that created that was that the county would use the money for schools, but the city ought to get some of the money because there are other activities that require some funding, and cities, unlike Franklin, that have no other impact fees, were left high and dry, so to speak.
So in other words, we were not typical. This really benefited a lot of...
We were atypical. I think there are maybe 11 or 12 cities that have impact fees of some kind that they had passed in the back.
But this is for everybody. Now, if the county has an impact fee.
That's right. If the county has an impact fee, it's state law. Mm-hmm. So back during that summer, and it was immediately before the election in which you were elected, in that October of '07, the county came to the city and asked that money be returned to the county. That did not get a tremendously warm welcome.
So when did this happen? Because I was...
July, August of that year.
I thought I was coming to all the meetings then. I don't remember that.
I want to say it was at a finance committee, at one of the committee meetings. And to make a long story short, there was reluctance on the part of the committee to do anything. People other than the committee members were here, and some spoke for or against what we should do with that. As a compromise, I think Mary Anderson asked that we set the money aside for educational purposes. And he mentioned the fact that, for example, in front of Franklin High School, there's going to have to be work done for turn lanes and signalization and things that on Claude Yates or in the immediate vicinity. They're really school-related, but they're not on the school footprint, and therefore the county's not going to pay for them. And cities...
let's talk about this, but let's go back and talk about that later, because whenever that came to the Planning Commission, they did agree to pay for some turn lanes there.
For some things.
Yeah. That's right.
But one of the things that was anticipated was monies that the city might have to spend at the West Haven Elementary School when it's built, or any future schools. The Centennial High School, if additional work had to be done.
There's just infrastructure needs in and around schools.
That schools do not pay for. I mean, they have historically not paid for. So one of the proposals was, why don't you set that in reserve for the project that's going to come along one day, and that will force the city to incur some expenses that are really school-related, but they're not really they're off-site improvements. And lo and behold, we happen to have one now. But we have not had guidance for these last really 3 years on what to do with these funds. We didn't know if we were going to return them to the county or put them in a new fund or whatever we were going to do for them. So we essentially have held them in reserve and showed them as both an asset and a liability, because we didn't know if they were going to be returned or cordoned off in some particular fashion. So we have never recognized them as revenue. And that's really why I wanted to put this on there tonight. First of all, to let you know where we stood on June the 30th, but also to ask the question and to get you to start thinking about, where should this money go? I mean, technically, I think other cities are putting it in their general fund. That's probably not the appropriate place for that. We have a facilities tax fund. That's probably not the appropriate place to put this, even though we have funds like the drug fund, where we have federal money and state money within the same fund, and we reserve them, and we are careful to spend them separately on different things. I mean, my recommendation is that we would put this in the capital projects fund, because that is ultimately where it's going to be spent, and just create a reserve within that fund for
educational
whatever these projects may be.
Now, wait, what is the capital projects fund, though? I thought we had the facilities tax, we have the impact fee as a separate fund, but do we have a separate fund for capital projects?
We do, and in fact, it's almost our biggest fund. I mean, that's where bond proceeds go into.
Okay, where bond proceeds go into.
And that's where capital projects go out. And we
But
use...
is it a part of our general fund?
It is not.
So where is it?
It's in the back with the hotel tax and the facilities tax. If you look at the year-end report that came out with your packet, there's a capital project fund, and it shows where we received the bond money last year, $40 million, and we spent 20-something million on a variety of projects.
Yeah.
We do fine-tune those projects in a way where we do track them very specifically, and we give you reports in the form of that bond use summary that's kind of summarizes that in a non-accounting type of way. But that would be my recommendation. There's no urgency to making this decision, except that now that we are preparing to use it, I think the auditors, when they come in next week, in fact, are probably going to want to have a sit-down with us and talk about where we think we should put this.
Right.
And what I'd like to do is just get this on your agenda, get this in front of you where you can be thinking about that. We'll talk to the auditors, and at the October meeting, maybe make a decision about how we want to handle this. And one of the things they're probably going to ask is, what is your policy about spending that? And that's where I'll punt to you, because at this point, no policy has been made, and that's why the money hasn't really been recognized yet.
And we need to do that before we spend it.
And we really need to do that before we spend it. Again, we're probably spring before we're going to start spending any considerable amount of this money, but we need to get it in the right place and start it correctly and be able to track it correctly.
Well, if we recognize that the agreement with the county was that it would somehow be related to improvement.
There is no such agreement.
There wasn't.
Well, there's...
If there was an agreement like that, we would have already recognized the...
Well, we now have an interlocal agreement that deals with this specific school and highlights
And this amount.
some broad improvements, but does not address this specific funding. The $1 million that's in that agreement is a separate
From
million
them.
from the Williamson County Schools.
And so none of this is committed in that interlocal.
We have not, although we've talked
That's
about
what
it
was in
in terms
discussion,
of what appears to be the highest priority among those improvements is approximately a $2 million construction project for improvements on McEwen in the Wilson Pike area. And so I think in some ways, your actions are starting to form that policy by saying it's about city infrastructure that may benefit a school-related project, but also has general public benefit. And I think something along those lines, that broad, gives you discretion to identify what you think is the most important priority, and especially focused on city infrastructure and city responsibilities, I think is a good place to be and to start that. And I think Russ's suggestion too, in terms of putting it in the capital fund, we can still
reserved
identify it.
separately.
Yeah, you'll still know where, and we can still track it, even though it's within that fund, and identify what projects it's working towards. But, this is something we're going to start using fairly soon, just because that's a project we want to get started on, and it's going to have a pretty long time frame to get done everything we need to get done, but we want to start moving on that as well. So we can bring it back to you
Right.
next meeting to kind
I
of...
think that broad brushstroke you just made is a pretty good one, because it seems to give you plenty of latitude to move it around, but it's also
directed enough that it's not vague.
I think it's consistent with the general spirit of what this money's about, but also, it is still the city's money at the end of the day, and the board needs to be able to have the ability to make the decisions it thinks are the right decisions about how to apply it.
So that's another kind of consensus that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Passing the palms over,
We bless the.
levitating it.
Yeah, I was really surprised because I'd never heard of it, and even though there's certainly a lot of the budget I don't know anything about, I certainly,
But
I
this
would
has
have known
been
about $1
sitting
million.
somewhere.
Russ has been faithfully reminding me of it on a regular basis since I got here, that we gotta figure that out.
Auditors will find it one day.
But I don't, since we've been elected, has it ever been mentioned? Never, as far as I know. I don't think so.
Recall it.
I can't remember a case where it's come
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
But, if you look at the monthly amounts, it started out slowly enough where it was just not a huge consideration. But like famous senators have said, $1 million here and $1 million there, and pretty soon it's real money. It has grown into a sizable amount of money, even during a downturn, when there has not been a lot of construction.
So but this is a facilities tax that is levied on residential and non-residential both, right? Whereas the school tax, the school impact fee is just on residential. Now, we don't get that.
Right.
But the school impact
Separate
fee is only levied on residential, and that's a county fee that they share with the Franklin Special School District, as I recall.
That's different.
Okay. So, and then the last part that we're trying to look at here then would be the monthly report. It's for information only.
Their information
Right.
only. If you have questions, we're available. The year-end update is somewhat different from the one we gave you last month because there are all the adjustments. This is what we believe will be the final, unless the auditors turn up something that we have missed. These are the final numbers.
And then we have two items that will come up the next meeting.
Correct.
Okay. Is there anything else then that
We will set
needs
the
to?
meeting, because you
Or
have
we just had on there, what we think is the typical third Thursday, October
Let me tell you,
21st at
it
5.
will have to be 5 o'clock. I mean, I was lucky to get here today at 5. So, that's just the way it is.
October 21st.
21st at 5.
So that's the third Thursday then.
I got it on there already.
Okay,
Me too.
so.
You can
that's
have an
it.
explanation for me.
You're that excited about it.
I still never know, do we have to have a motion to adjourn, or do we just?
I so move.
You don't make sure, though.
All in favor, aye.